Awesome. Hey everyone, how's everyone doing?
Hi,
Hi,
very well.
all good.
Hello, John, Hubert, Richard. We are waiting for a couple more people to join. I hope the audience is doing great because we are looking forward to a lot of questions today for this panel. And audience, please tell us in the chat, are you excited about today's panel and what do you think we are going to discuss today? And what are you expecting to learn out of this panel? Drop your comments in the chat box till we have rest of the presenters join us. All right. So the audience needs to wake up a little bit. So let's discuss among ourselves. Panelists, how are you feeling today? And what do you think the audience is gain out of today's panel? Hubertus, do you want to take that question? Hubertus, I think you're on mute. Hubert, you are on mute. We cannot hear you. Hey, William, in the chat. Richard, do you maybe want to take that question till Hubertus is able to figure out some technical challenges? We have
I was gonna jump in just to keep the flow, but to be honest, the like we've had some really interesting discussions or rather exchanges by email prior to this, and the expectations are very high. So in the sense that our panel covers so many different aspects that we won't be able to solve today. So as long as we can touch upon some important ones and share, that I would be happy with that. I'll let the others talk because I think Hubertus is back. Is back.
absolutely. Hubert, would you like to go next? What do you think the audience is gonna gain out of today's panel?
First of all, it's great to meet you all. It's a bit later for me. I'm calling in from Berlin, so I'm really excited, and I equipped myself with a nice glass of wine. So I cheers everyone, and I think we're going to have a really controversial discussion about the necessity to protect us as individuals from data being misused, but also the necessity to open up data sharing as much as possible. And that's a real interesting balance to strike. And I'm very looking forward to discussing that with you guys.
That is awesome. And both Richard and Hubertus cannot agree with you more. Um, as audience, as you see, the theme of this panel itself is not a simple topic. If we have to talk about data privacy, it is huge. So it's gonna be a controversial and very insightful panel today. I would personally encourage you all to post all the questions that you have in the chat. We will try our best to get them answered. We have some wonderful panel of experts here who have great length of experience in this field. So any questions that you might have, please post it in the chat box and let's make it a very engaging panel discussion. So before I dive into the introductions, let me give you all a little brief of what we are going to do today and give you some context on data privacy itself. So technically safe. This is a panel on safety and privacy in technology. And you all have probably heard the expression that data is the new oil. It's quite fair. Companies are eager to gather all the data that we have, and understandably so. Data today is fueling an increasing number of businesses, personalized customer experiences, automated marketing messaging, and science driven insights. All of these things depend on the quality and the volume of your data. And on the other hand, security experts are keen to protect the privacy and safety of this data belonging to individuals. So, data privacy, what does that mean? Data privacy usually refers to handling of critical personal information, also known as personally identifiable information or PII, and personal health information or PHI. So, this information can include social security numbers, health records, financial data. It can include bank accounts, credit card numbers, and so much more. In a business context, though, data privacy goes beyond PII of employees and customers. So, data privacy also concerns the information that helps the company operate. And this could involve things like proprietary research, development data, or even financial information. So, if now let's consider this. If items like financial data, critical healthcare information, and other personal consumer or user data gets into the wrong hands, it can create a dangerous situation. And the lack of access control regarding personal information can actually put individuals at a risk of fraud and identity theft. And those are just the two things that I'm naming here. The dangers could be much more. And that is the reason why keeping your private data and sensitive information safe is paramount. And through this panel, we will take a closer look at what data privacy is, what is vital to stay, and what we require to stay on top of it, right? So we have a wonderful panel here. I would like to pass on the mic to each of our panel members so they can introduce themselves in brief to the audience before we dive deep into the panel discussion. So, Jared, let's start with you. Can you please unmute yourself, tell us who you are, what you do, and what are you bringing to this panel today?
Yes, thank you. And nice to connect with everyone today. My name is Jared Arms. I'm the founder and CEO of Collar.io, which is a technology platform for community and businesses. And I'm also the co-founder of ChildSexTrafficking.org, which is a platform that raises awareness on serious issues such as human trafficking taking place worldwide. And today I'll be talking about the importance of blockchain verification, identity, and just some of the issues taking place with unlawful content that's being decentralized and on these irreversible platforms. So I'd like to just talk about that today.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction, Jared. Richard, would you like to go next?
Hi, I'm Ricard Gras. I'm founder and CEO at Captic. Captic.io is based in Vienna, in Austria, so it's also quite dark here. But I don't have wine today, like Hubertus. But I'll get onto that in a minute. Now, what we do is we have developed what I call all the layers that allow and facilitate the creation of virtual worlds from a web native engine all the way to a proprietary pipeline. And of course, the result is that we host virtual worlds. We host, in fact, more than 1,000 unique presences created by users. And yeah, I'll stop there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ricard. That's awesome. Hubertus, how about you go next?
Yeah, thanks, Rachira. Well, I'm a trained lawyer, so originally went into law, but then very quickly took a different angle and went into business in the early days of the internet and telecommunications industries in the 90s, and have been involved in big tech, global tech companies for about 2 decades, and I went through actually some of the transformation we already had back then, from literally the physical to internet world, and from narrowband to broadband. So we've been to a couple of changes, and I see quite a few similarities happening again. I also work for medium-sized companies. I've accompanied a couple of large SMEs in their digital transformation, and I regularly also work with startups. So I have a fair view, I would say, on the different sizes of business. And I'm the founder, and that's sort of my second head here today. I'm the founder of a think tank, or think act tank, we call it, called Digitize Berlin Connect Europe, which is focused on the digitalization of public services, starting in Berlin, but across Europe, so public service. And for that, I hand back to you or to John.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hubertus. John, let's start with your introduction.
Geez, I'm kind of hard to explain. I started off as a very curious child that just kept getting into trouble. I guess you'd call me a hacker at age 12. So by the time I turned 18, I kind of realized I needed to really get into a different circle, and hopped in my car and drove west until I hit California, trying to find this city called San Jose, which I seem like a complete idiot because it's San Jose. But what do I know as a kid from New Jersey that grew up in a poor, rough neighborhood? So Within a year, I found myself as a life science researcher at Stanford University with a bunch of these PhDs all behind me going, look, you could just go straight for the PhD. We'll sponsor you. And, you don't actually have to attend any of the classes or pay any of the fees or enroll even. And so I worked for $28,000 a year for 5 years building medical treatment equipment there until I posted the Berkeley Unix to the internet. And then the CEO, president of the university, was waiting for me Monday morning when I showed up. And I was like, look, we didn't use any of the campus's equipment. And one of the guys posted my Stanford email address, which caused the VAX that did our X-ray treatment management database, caused it to crash and just caused all kinds of havoc. Anyway, so I was kind of removed from the campus after that. Actually, all of our grants and anything that I had my hand in got its grants pulled. Before you know it, Wells Fargo wanted to hire me, and I'm like, you sure you really want to bring me on your team? But that was an awesome time. I helped upgrade them to TCP/IP and got to see the internals of a bank. And then very early in setting up like 60 ISPs across Los Angeles, I introduced VR, and it turned out in '94 he was like the big icon in the VR world. I didn't realize the impact that my work at CyberJava Internet Cafe and with Leary had. At Stanford, I was also heavily advocating for VR because I was a big fan of Jaron Lanier, seeing him in a TV interview in the early '80s. So I've been passionate about VR, been involved in multiple VR startups. Oh gosh, it's hard to put a label on it. Antibots is probably the biggest robotics company I've been involved with. I was head of engineering there for several years. We had Coca-Cola did us almost like a commercial for us. The opening season credits of Silicon Valley TV show had my company's logo. We were the only small company in the opening credits. All these big company logos, and then there's mine, because I really am like 35 years in the Valley doing this like small startup gunslinger thing, Anyway.
That is a very, very interesting introduction, John. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us. And I'm pretty sure we'll uncover a lot of that going deep into this panel as well. Last but not the least, audience, my name is Ruchira Pokhriyal. I am a security incident responder at Amazon Web Services. And for today's session, I will be your host and moderator, making sure that all the panelists are able to clearly express their views, and also keeping an eye on the chat to make sure we can get as many as of your questions get answers. Full disclosure, I do have a little bit of flu, so don't mind my scratchy voice. I will try not to sound too bad on the panel. So without further ado, let's get started. Again, audience, let's keep the session really, really engaging. We'll not get this opportunity with these experts again. So let's make sure we put all our questions in the comment box. So to kick off the discussion, let me start with a very basic question. So data privacy versus data security. What exactly is the difference? And I'd love for each one of you to express your 2 cents on this. Let's start with Jared and move into a circle. Jared, would you like to tell us what is the difference between data privacy and data security as per your experience? And Jared, you are on mute.
Okay, here I go. Sorry about that. So to keep it simple, just because your data is private doesn't mean it's secure, and just because it's secure doesn't mean it's private. So just to keep it simple like that, when we're talking about data, of course, it could be videos, information, pictures, and things like that. So sometimes on public platforms, such as we could just say YouTube, for an example, of course, that's very secure, but a lot of things are accessible. You may not want to have all your children, precious moments may be public. So for something like that, it's very secure, but it doesn't mean it's always private, even though you can set it to be private. But I like to always say that just because it's private doesn't mean it's secure, and just because it's secure doesn't mean it's private.
That is 100% true. And it is so important to differentiate between what data needs to be secured versus what does not need to be secured. And we'll talk more about that. But let's ask Ricard. Ricard, what do you think the difference is between data privacy and data security? And do you agree with Jared's views on it?
I do, and in the sense that you cannot always be 100%. You cannot cover for all eventualities. The one thing that comes to mind, because obviously I represent, let's say, I'm a tech supplier in that sense. The one thing that comes to mind is, and this we make a conscious decision about, and I'm not saying it's the right one because nobody has the right answers, but we do take into consideration the following: how much data do we need? And we try to take as little as possible, and that we do consciously. So I think that already solves a lot of the problems, because perhaps we know we should advertise this more to build trust, but that's not a strategy in a PR point of sense. We do that because we don't need it. If we don't need data, like you in your introduction, Ruchira, you described all the complexity of data and all the implications. We don't want that. We don't need that, and we certainly don't want to trade with it. So this is a conscious decision that we make. Having said that, we do need some data for operational purposes. For example, if you own, create, develop a virtual world, you need to save it somewhere, and we need to know who's done it. Otherwise, who would tell us where's my content, right? So we do need, let's say, an email, but that email can be anything, and the same for a username. We need things like what device you're joining from on the day, so that we can, stream the right way, and then we know more or less what's the device of choice from a user point of view, but not much more. And this is something that I think Web3, again, I don't have all the answers, but I think thinking about as a service provider of any kind, what data do you need from the users, that already solves a lot of the problems. But then again, that's our approach. Other companies might need more. And as you said before, data is the new oil. Is a tough and tricky question, but that's our approach, and that's what I can bring to the table.
That's true, and I agree with you, Ricard. Their data itself is so complex, and organizations that deal with this data, they have a different way to operate with it. What kind of data should be protected versus what kind of data should not be protected? How much data does each application need? All of those questions are pretty vague, and different companies deal with it in a different way. Which brings me to the next question, and I'd like to direct it to Hubertus and John. We'll start with Hubertus's views first on it. So, Hubert, what kind of data should be protected? We know that data is classified into different forms: restricted, public data, private data. How do we do this classification, and how can one define what data needs to be restricted versus public versus private?
Yeah, well, let me start with a distinction between, or a definition of privacy, related to your previous question as well. I think in very broad terms, it is very helpful to distinguish just between private, personal information and non-personal information. That is a first split. And with personal information, any information that is directly linked to me as a person or you as a person, to a human individual, is concerned. And this type of data should have a special level of protection. Yeah. And then there's all the other data. Within the other data, there's lots of different subcategories. And as Ricard just said, some is needed for business very urgently, other for health purposes and so on. So there's a whole world of different desires, demands, and safety requirements as well. But the first distinction should be between personal information and non-personal information. And if I now briefly do a little excursus towards the personal information, most of us here on the panel and in the audience are aware of it. In most of the countries today in the world, 137 out of 194, there is some level of regulation regarding privacy and personal information. It's just in very, very different forms. And that's possibly something we should look at later on, because these different forms also reflect probably a bit the economical systems. I'm particularly thinking obviously about China and social screening. shows the scoring, a very different approach to personal data than you would find in California or in Europe with very similar data protection laws. So the first thing I think we should remember, in principle, there is a good level of, as a starting point, at least in most countries, and there are 4 or 5 sort of frameworks that actually are very useful to compare if we have the time later on. But as we also heard, business data is very important also for all societies to actually encourage data sharing. And that's where we have this sort of this conflict a bit between the individual wanting to be protected and the society wanting probably a maximum of data sharing for good purposes. And that brings me to my last point, and then I happily hand over to John. I think it's really important in all these questions. First of all, the question, what private data should we protect particularly and how, but also how do we enable data sharing? There are 3 elements that I would suggest that we should be the guiding principles, because any regulation, we should first think, why do we regulate? Why do we set a frame? And that is number 1, safety, number 2, trust, and number 3, is it ethical? With safety, we're really we're referring to the very basic need of individuals, Maslow's first level or second level of basic human needs. People want to feel safe, and that concerns their physical, but also their data around them. But then trust, we need trust. We need to ensure trust, and that's what regulation should also provide. If we have a open-minded data sharing environment, and what purpose for societal, for the greater societal good, in a way you could say the societal contract on data sharing. That is super, super difficult to set up. I can later on refer a bit to what's happening in Europe on that front, because there's new regulation coming. But if we now enter the discussion, I think it's great if we distinguish between the privacy part, the personal data, and more the business side.
Absolutely. And Hubertus, you have already covered so many important pointers in what you just described. You've already covered why data classification, which is going to be my next question, but you've already covered why data classification is important in the first place and what could be the consequences if restricted or private data is shared in public. And the 2 parts where there is a conflict, like organizations trying to create a platform where data can be openly and safely shared versus audience which is concerned about how much data are they actually sharing on these platforms. So similarly, I'd like to know some of your thoughts and possibly some examples and stories that you may have come across during your experience in the industry, John. So over to you.
Yeah, so it's a much more complicated topic because it's more about who's the responsible party, who's custodial. You know, if I go to some little rinky-dink website to do e-commerce and I give them my information, I wouldn't be surprised if they save my credit card number in clear text in a file somewhere. And I could probably do some little clever hack to the thing to actually list out what's going on in the directories and see the files and access that data. You know, it's amazing. You see people try and log in to one site with the password they use on another site. Just having a log of the wrong passwords could potentially open people up to being hacked. You know, and then you've got the medical industry. They've got something called HIPAA compliance, and they've got a whole unbelievably draconian set of regulations on how they manage data, such as an MRI scan. So, you know, one of my first things I did at Stanford when I got to an SGI was a rotating skeleton, which ended up in their TV commercial, and to sign a release to allow his, you know, we're talking about his skeleton to be thrown on a TV commercial. It was kind of a big deal because, again, the healthcare privacy laws. And then to do this scientifically in papers, they just use the person's first 2 initials to try and abstract away so they're not violating anything about the healthcare of the patient. Then there's the PCI compliance laws, which are completely different in their payment card industry. So if you're going to do any kind of credit card processing directly, you've got to meet their industry standards, and they require you can only be certain versions of Unix. It's got to be within 90 days of the latest update. All kinds of enormous amounts of upkeep there. And then there's also third-party auditors that have to come in and review what you've done on the site. So, each party has got different things, and then you end up with, again, Jay Rinky Dink, a porn site or something. You can't guarantee anything about what you put into that site. And then you have to ask yourself the question, well, what can this data be used for? And at this point, if we've got a recording of your mom's voice and we've got her phone number, we can call you up with her phone number, spoofing her voice, going, "Oh, I'm in trouble. I need you to wire me $5,000 right now. Me and your father are in a hospital in Oklahoma, and we went on some vacation." And people will do it, the level of this stuff sophistication is growing quite quickly. I pointed out there was an HBO series that talked about how people were being swatted, and this one kid would stay on the line pretending to be in the house while the police were coming in, going, "Yeah, please help me, I'm trapped in the," and the police would be almost like on a shoot first, ask questions later basis. He'd have them so wound up. So who again, the question is who you're protecting from. If some guy's individually trying to target you because you're Salman Rushdie or something, man, it's a rough world out there. So, and then you've got, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to go.
No, completely all right. I just wanted to say there are like so many consequences to what we post online, and we'll be diving deeper into that later in the session as well. I wanted to take a moment to get back to Jared because John just mentioned a very good point about uh, people scamming each other online, and that's one thing that absolutely concerns, especially the youth today. So, Jared, where do you think the conflict is? Because a lot of people, especially the youth and kids, are using um, all these platforms online today and sharing information there. There are several instances of cyberbullying, spamming, phishing, etc., which people are falling prey to. So, where do you think the conflict lies? You said, in very simple terms, data needs to be protected or it needs to be public in certain places. So, where do you think the conflict is actually that we are not able to decide how much information should be out there versus what should be reserved just for ourselves? Jared, you're on
My
mute.
bad. All right, my bad. I would say more so the technical conflict that I'm pointing out, and I just have to use two like real cases. So you had the case with Pornhub late in 2020, which Visa, MasterCard discovered most of the major card issuers pulled out due to over like 10 million videos on the platform being purchased, underage, rape, all that crazy stuff. They was able to take them down, censor them. I believe they adapted cryptocurrency as another form of payment. So that's one, I would say, conflict just on a broader scale, is that when you have these governments that can censor these platforms financially, and they can just adopt another service like a crypto, that's not always like the best solution, just to say, okay, well, if the major credit cards issuers, we have this next. We still have to look into these cases of these underage people on this content. It was over 80% of their content that they removed. You have other things too as well, like the SB 145 bill that was passed that basically I'll share that another topic, but for 14 through 17-year-olds who give consensual anal or oral intercourse, sex with adults up to an age of 10 years of an age range, now judges can decide if they have to can make a decision to place them as a sex offender, not on the registry. At first, before the SB 145 bill was passed, vaginal intercourse, oral and anal, by default, you had to register as a sex offender. There's no reason why you should want to do anything like that with a minor. So those bills also make it a conflict as well, just aside from what we're trying to do in the community. Talking about it like on a cultural standpoint, You know, you have a lot of serious issues going on in the communities. Me representing for the Black community, a lot of Black on Black gun violence, drug activity, poverty, and things like that taking place. So sometimes a lot of things happen on site. You know, friends, family members may get into it, kill each other, unfortunately, and then they may come online like the metaverse, Facebook, and Twitter, and use those tools to somewhat try to further hurt each other. But the real damage has been done already with these lives being lost. And just to close on that, I think another conflict technically is that it's exciting to say that we can like truly decentralize our content. No one can take it down and all of that stuff. But when you have these criminals hurraying for the same thing, when we're talking about content, unlawful content, it could be illegal explosive purchases, anything falling under child sexual exploitation, to animal abuse, terroristic messages, with those things not being able to come down as easy. I'm working with a lot of law enforcement, different lawyers who have, you know, found these bad people, prosecuted them, locked them up. But right now, child porn and certain things can't come off the D-Web as easy as it can come off, say, Facebook, Pornhub, and all these different platforms. So it's exciting, as you know, to talk about the future of decentralization. I don't think that we should have a 100% decentralized future that's truly censorship resistant, because Tor, you know, that's a very secure browser, but 63% of those sites within their browser created by a military is child pornography related. And if they can't take it down as our U.S. government, then, you know, blockchain is just going to be different stuff. So to close like a firearm or a knife, it's just a tool. It could be used for good or bad, but the majority of these bigger people who are using it for the wrong purposes are using it quite in a dark way. And it's pretty dissatisfying to see some of these like I get a lot of people argue on Twitter with me that people aren't purchasing child pornography with cryptocurrency. You have the FBI, which is on the DOJ.gov website with unsealed documents with people who they locked up that has made over $10 million in Bitcoin selling child pornography and stuff. So I could talk about that, you know, more and more and more, but it's a lot of conflicts that lay. But the problem with the blockchain problem is that, you know, just decentralization and censorship resistant irreversibility and stuff like that. And I guess if we was to start making wallets that's custodial based, to some people that wouldn't really be like a true blockchain platform if someone could control it. But I do think a sheriff should come in town, and this wild west experience should die down just a bit.
Absolutely. Those are some amazing pointers, Jared. I do see John raising his hand. So, John, please feel free to unmute yourself and chime in.
So you know, the blockchain's a double-edged sword. You know, it's probably the last thing I would want to use to commit a crime, because it's all traceable, especially with the KYC, know your customer rules, you know, at every exchange. You know, and you can try and do all kinds of machinations to hide a wallet and maneuver and whatever, but at the end of the day, there's an indelible trail left behind, where, you know, something like cash is very clean. There's very little record of you know, how I came about buying the dollar soda from 7-Eleven if I don't keep the receipt, you know. So, you know, I see if there's enough people with the technical know-how, and I can't believe there isn't like an AI tool that just kind of does this automatically. Certainly law enforcement could do this, is trace back people by their cryptocurrency payments. This actually comes to an earlier point I want to make, which is this kind of Web3 decentralization thing, which is really about removing, you know, right now Facebook has ownership of all of my photos and data. They can use it in ads or whatever they want, you know, or training sets in AI going forward in the future. Not that I really care, but, you know, the argument is, well, we could make a version of Facebook in which everything sits on IPFS and you need the right crypto keys. So it's sort of completely visible to everybody, and at the same time, not really accessible without the right cryptography. You know, so this meets sort of the technical, and now we try and map it onto what you want, you know, from a human ergonomics point of view use. But certainly storing things in a decentralized manner changes things. So there was CMIT that did a whole decentralized network with a coin, and a number of attempts have been made. I'm looking at doing one leveraging WebRTC in browsers and not really involving myself in much in the crypto world. But a lot of when people apply Web3, they assume something on an Ethereum blockchain that points to usually IPFS.
And to respond to that, John, great follow-up. We actually established a partnership last year with Phoenix FBI Outreach Community. You can FBI agent Laura Wright, just a point of contact. And what you're referring to is tracking analysis. So the problem is that you do have mixers and you do have operating systems like Graphene OS that you can install and remove the operating system to block any IMEI connections and geolocation protocols. And it is a way that you really can't track them. We working with law enforcement and people in the FBI, and you can track to see that they purchased stuff. You can find the person and lock them up, but you still can't take the stuff down. And the cryptocurrency isn't the same thing as an NFT. Those cryptocurrencies are divisible. With these NFTs as an indivisible asset, it's going to take a lot of people and a lot of brains just to learn how to get inside of a wallet to either transfer from A to B and just like burn it. But it's more so the problem isn't really tracking. That's the purpose of blockchain. It's a transparent, trustless system. So that's nothing that's like, oh, we figured out what it really is. That's the point of it. But the other thing is that the content, aside from the cryptocurrency, you're talking about payments. I'm talking about more so data.
Yeah. Once something's on that blockchain, it's never going away.
And that's the issue when we're talking about unlawful content. So if we, like the leaders of Web3, from developers, educators, investors, VCs, whatever, that's just something important to make sure that we have regulations and standards, that we're the ones building these technologies for the future that can't be censored for illegal or legal content.
Well, you go to the other side, and I start my discussion with, the amount of banning and blocking I and my friends have received because of, we tried making a joke and it like fact checked us and banned us from the community and all kinds of craziness. Because the bar is basically, there is no bar. It's trivial for them, on the other hand, you've got the extreme of once it's up in the blockchain world, good luck putting that genie back in the bottle. You can't remove it. When I released the open source Unix, that was sort of my first thing, is how to make sure I get this out in a way that it doesn't go back. Because at the time, AT&T was claiming ownership, even though they'd long been, rewritten without AT&T code. But, it had to go through the court system to get resolved. I
just wanted to say that I think to base the whole discussion around blockchain might be kind of not fair in the sense that the complexity and diversity of the issues that Jared exposed earlier is so massive, and blockchain is a part of it, right? And it also fascinated me how Jared explained not just these issues, but also the problems that regulators and governments have to address them. And the question I had or have as a user, but also as a supplier of technology, is what happens in order to prevent that? And of course, the answer is educators and families and parents and so on. But it is so hard to find out what people is up to, what happened when, and so on and so on. So I think the word that comes up is regulation. And every country is like, how hard it is. Yes, they are keen to do it, from what I gather. We had a workshop with the European Union 2 weeks ago. They're really, really keen to try and regulate and help. But the thing is, everybody is kind of lost in many ways. But I think we should also simplify the conversation sometimes and empower the users or the parents, but especially the users, to flag issues so that we can, for example, kind of as a tech supplier, then help and channel this, because right now there's a lot of diversity and a lot of complexity in this, and I hope we can do something before the problem takes place.
That is true. And so this topic is so intricate and so complex. Jared did mention a good point, and so did all of you. How do we prevent this? Is education enough? Is educating people enough? I think it takes much more than education. That makes me very curious about what are the legal and ethical considerations surrounding the use of personal data as well as non-personal data in technology. And Hubertus, I think you are one of the experts who would be really great at answering this question because you've been a lawyer. So please enlighten us on what would be some legal considerations around the use of personal data so that at least some of these issues can be prevented. And also, please unmute yourself and chime in, express your views on what everybody else had to say about this just now.
Yeah, well, I partly referred to that earlier. So I kind of briefly summarize again where I think one should start when one looks at the personal data, which are the three principles. Why would we regulate? It has to have a purpose, and the purpose should be threefold. It should be providing safety, and that's literally for the individual. An individual, every human being should have the right to feel safe. That means different things for different people, but in the digital environment, it means that you have also confidence that your personal data is not being misused. Really, really important. The second one is trust. Also refers to individuals, but also to the societal environment. Without trust, no data sharing. We will sit as companies, as organizations, as governments, will sit on our data and not share it. So it's super important to have a second driver and always to measure any regulation by this principle of trust. And the third one, particularly in this context here, the GatherVerse, I think it's a guiding principle of all of us. It has to be in an ethical environment, an ethical context, in a way, a societal contract where we measure the effectiveness of regulation, of rules, of law, by whether it helps to provide an ethical environment. Which brings me to one point I would love to chuck back into the discussion, because how do we define what safety is in trust environment? And that's very much related to, I think, cultural context. We already see it, the different expectation in terms of what data should be protected. Some people are very relaxed. Some countries are much more relaxed. And I can tell you, speaking from Berlin, and Ricard probably can back that up, even in Europe, we have one set of laws. The interpretation, how strict this should be applied, is just amazing. Very strict, very narrow-minded, very restrictive in Germany, quite relaxed in some of the Nordic countries. So this cultural context is really important. Today, this now leads me to my question, which I would like to pose back to you guys. Today, it's quite simple. It's rules are set by geographies, by states, or in this case, by countries, or the EU as a sort of unity of nations. In the metaverse, who is that? Is that the United Nations? Is that big companies? Is it all of us? So I see a huge challenge by literally figuring out the good and sort of good principles we have applied, we've learned to apply in the real world. How shall we do that in the metaverse? Because it's really not clear at all who will set legal rules there. I don't have the answer. What do you think, you guys?
Absolutely. And that is such a brilliant question because we already have so many data privacy related challenges in the physical world. And now we are slowly moving towards metaverse. It's like you cannot imagine how much worse those challenges can get on the online world. And we already have a lot of them if we consider virtual games, etc. So I want to try something a little different here. Audience, please list down the top 3 or 4 challenges that you are currently facing in the physical world or in the metaverse, online gaming, etc. Any challenges you're facing to data privacy or online safety. And we will take the top 3, 4 here and discuss amongst our panel. So feel free to chime in, put your options, top 3 data privacy or online safety challenges that you are concerned about right now, and let's discuss that. So your time starts now, audience. Please start putting your answers in there. And meanwhile, Jared, I would like to circle back with you again and ask you the same questions. There are several challenges to data privacy and how much data we are sharing online. Now, the answer to this might be vast, but what are the top 3 or 4 challenges that you think are uh, so dangerous that they require our attention right now? And Ricard, I'll ask you the same question after Jared is done sharing his views.
So it's my top 4 issues that I see with data privacy.
And
Well,
it's
in regards to Web3, I would say like when we're talking about like identity verification, one issue with a lot of students is that when they're trying to connect with adults, like for organizations on the blockchain right now, they're connecting with like these wallet addresses. Now they're moving to these human readable blockchain domains, but not all the domains. I'm sorry, some of these domains are like purchased by cyber squatters and trademark infringers. So I've been noticing like this trend of students connecting with blockchain domains that hasn't been verified and also being scammed. That's one way. 2, just talking about some of the issues I'm talking about. They have they have this wave of like artificial intelligence child pornography, which I'm not sure if that's illegal to purchase or create or stream or whatever, but I know that that's something that's growing. Some of these platforms that you have to enter, from my research, you have to submit like unlawful content as well. And then the 4th one I would say is Signal. I love their platform. We use it a lot for like encryption and like encrypted messages. But when the when the feds tried to send those 2 subpoenas in 2016 and 2018, just based off how their infrastructure is created, they really didn't have too much information to provide back aside from the account creation date and the phone number. So I do think it's a problem too when these new applications are like allowing us to, I guess, exchange information that they don't necessarily store, because it's really impossible to see what's going on the dark side too. So again, I know like the whole blockchain community, like, how you always going against us, even though you for us. But I really just don't think having like a true decentralized, censorship resistant platform is the future. That's like the biggest problem, not really more so of like the content right now. Is just about, when people upload content that shouldn't be up and it can't come down. It's so 4 of them is just like, my main thing is like these blockchain domains that's not being verified, this artificial intelligence content that's starting to be created, these applications that's not recording these messages. And the 4th one, like when the feds or anyone sends a subpoena and they can't collect nothing, that's not a healthy response, to say the least, for our future. I know that was kind of broad, but just to make sure we can all say different things.
absolutely. And those are some pointers that I couldn't personally think of. So thank you so much for bringing that awareness around these concepts, Jared. Thank you so much. And Ricard, what do you think are your top 4 concerns about data privacy, data online safety from an organizational perspective?
So let me open up, because obviously I can think of not just 4 but 40 points that we would love to address or solve, or at least partially. But the one thing that comes to mind is very generic, but also so that you can see the difficulties from again the tech supplier point of view, which is we host 1,500 different unique worlds, right? All of which are available 24/7. All you need to do is go there. Anybody else could join you, and so on. The way how I feel about this is in terms of safety specifically. I would love to make the perfect world that is safe from anybody, in terms of verbal abuse, any kind of abuse, anything to do with having images that are abusive in any way or offensive in any way. How can it possibly take care that this doesn't happen across all these worlds? It's literally impossible, and I hate the word policing in the context of virtual worlds. So I did a lot of work in Second Life back in the day, and you had many of the issues that we encountered today already back then. The situation still remains, unless I don't see a possibility of truly offering the level of support and 100% safety that our users deserve. So the question is, if I cannot do that and I cannot shut down the service, what are the mechanisms that I can put in place so that if something happens, if somebody feels offended in any way, abused in any way, they can get our help somehow. That's what we're focusing on, because we are a loss, and that's what we're here today. I'm here today to learn, because I bring a very specific perspective on all this. And again, I'm opening up. I'm saying to you guys, I hope the perfect regulations. I hope there's tools in place that we can, I don't know, minimize the abuse and all these things that we're discussing. And at the same time, I'm like, yeah, but what can I do specifically? Because I know for a fact that I cannot oversight all these different worlds 24/7. That's my concern. So that's my number one concern.
Those are some really valid concerns, Ricard, and thank you for being so vulnerable and open with us about it. I do see John raising his hand, and I know we are almost on time, but I'm gonna try to cover two more questions before we end. But John, please unmute yourself and let us know what you think.
Comment. It's like you need like a moderator, any kind of forum where people are chatting, or it turns into flame wars and chaos very quickly and name calling. This is like a perfect application for Chat GPT kind of stuff. Just to sit back and monitor and go, oh, these people are conflicting, and break them up somehow. You end up with
easier said than done, but yeah, it's definitely interesting. But then you have to maybe find evidence, like Jared said. If I don't know if there's an offense that requires police intervention, then you need to provide
like
evidence as well.
Or you're going to want like a social credit score in this metaverse. Slashdot. I don't know if you've ever been on it. It's just like karma points, so people can see the interaction and vote people up or down. And that kind of gives you a louder voice, or suppresses you if you're like constantly getting negative scores from people.
Let me just add one. It's literally two words. My top one is the right to be forgotten, or the right to have personal data deleted again. That for me is the key. It builds on what just was being said, but it's absolutely crucial also to build trust.
Absolutely, I completely agree with that. And unfortunately, audience, with that, we are on time. I'm so sorry we had so much more content to cover, but we had a time limit as well. I hope you all enjoyed this panel. If you have any questions, please reach out to Christopher. Thank you so much, GatherVerse, for giving us this opportunity. We are sure we can figure out another session and making sure you stay connected with our wonderful panelists even after this. So thank you so much, everyone on this panel again. I've had a wonderful time learning with all of you, and I'm sure the audience did as well. And hopefully we'll see you soon. Thank you so much and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Cheers.